Hey everybody, my name is Dr. John Brittingham and I am your instructor for the online portion of UNIV 401 over these next few weeks. This class is the same UNIV 401 we've come to know and love, but it's just online and compressed a little bit. So in this video, I am going to talk to you about a few things. Specifically, I'm going to talk to you about three very important things. First, I'm going to tell you what this course is all about. I'm going to talk to you about the main structure of it and why we do it. Then I'm going to talk to you about the theme for the course, everything around which the various assignments kind of orient themselves. And then finally, we're going to talk about the major assignments that you will need to complete in order to successfully pass this class. All right, so without further ado, let's get into it. So, what even is this class? Well, UNIV 401, Advanced Integrative Studies, is the senior general education class for undergraduates attending Greenville University. It's a big fancy way of saying that this is the class that's part of the Gen Ed that's for seniors or for graduating folks, and it's really an attempt to bring everything that you've been working on over the past however many years together into one cohesive whole. All right? So it's a course that aims to provide students with a place where you can do some serious interdisciplinary research, you can demonstrate senior level communication skills, and you can engage in self reflective inquiry about the way that your values shape how you encounter and interact with the world. All of that has been going on in your education up until this point, and we are just taking that which was implicit and making it explicit in this case. All right? So the class is essentially about one big task, and that is the 401 project. You can think about 401 as a class where everything that you're doing is building up into this particular project. This project is a group project with some exceptions, focused on a specific topic within a larger context. So the course topic for us is love your neighbor. And specifically, we're looking at material ways that we can love our neighbor. How does a policy demonstrate that we love our neighbor? How does a housing district or zoning demonstrate that we love or don't love our neighbor? These are the sorts of things that we're going to get into because these are the sorts of things that our everyday life is impacted by. And they are places where our values come into contact with the actual material reality we live and move about within. Or don't move about within because we should all be sheltering at home still. Anyway, we'll go over the specifics of the projects later. For now, think about UNIV 401 like this. This is a class that your gen eds, all of them, have prepared you for. You've learned from a variety of sources. You've learned how to read different types of material, how to find good resources for building good arguments, and you've done this in classes like UNIV 101. You've learned how to communicate clearly and effectively in classes like English 105, and you've learned how to do values-based inquiry in a class like Theo 110. Right? You've learned how to do interdisciplinary work in science and Christianity. All of these things that you've been doing have been building up to this point. You've been prepared for this task, and now all that's left to do is to do it. But don't worry. I'll be there to help you through the various stages of this class, the various assignments that you'll be working on, helping you shape and hone your project so that it is within a reasonable scope and that your project speaks to the things that you are passionate about, that you and your group members value, and that tries to bring some good into the world or reveals good already happening in the world. Now that we've talked about what the course is, let's talk about this year's theme. Who is my neighbor? In just living our lives, we make certain assumptions about how the world works. We might assume, for instance, that the world is moving towards less inequality and that things are on the whole getting better. We might assume that the world is becoming more and more just. There is certainly data that goes towards this end that helps prove this point, but there is also data that would suggest that maybe our assumptions about how the world works are misplaced. In 2014, in the city of Ferguson, Missouri, outside of St. Louis, after the police shooting of Mike Brown, the national media started paying attention to the St. Louis region. One of the questions they began asking is, how did Ferguson, Missouri become Ferguson, Missouri? In other words, how did this suburb of St. Louis and the larger St. Louis region as a whole become so segregated? Now, if you're unsure about racial segregation in the city closest to Greenville University, this is also the city where I live, let me talk a little bit about this city. There is something that is known as the Delmar Divide. There's a road that runs through the city called Delmar. It's famous for the loop, the Delmar Loop, and a failed attempt to have a trolley that would attract tourists to the region. But this road is significant for a number of reasons. First and foremost, there is a huge racial and economic divide on one side of the road and on the other. Literally across the street from one another are people who are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars apart in terms of their yearly income. And there is a history that backs that up. On one side of the divide is the part of St. Louis that had private roads built. That's famous for some folks waving guns at protesters. On the other side, there are houses and vacant lots and places that have been left in disrepair and have been ignored and underfunded and undersupported for decades. It's a known aspect of St. Louis. In other words, without there being legal orders creating a kind of segregated city, there is a segregated city. This doesn't mean that people aren't trying to make it better. Plenty of people are. This doesn't mean that there's something inherently wrong with St. Louis. St. Louis is a city just like every other city. It is a place with a history that has been intersected with every other social movement, change, and upheaval that has happened everywhere else. And in that regard, it's not special. But no city is, except to the people that live there and care about it. Historically, segregation didn't just include something like water fountains and bathrooms, but entire neighborhoods and towns. As noted segregation scholar Richard Rothstein has pointed out in his landmark text, The Color of Law, to prevent lower-income African Americans from living in neighborhoods where middle-class whites resided, local and federal officials began in the 1910s to promote zoning ordinances to reserve the middle-class neighborhoods for single-family homes that lower-income families of all races could not afford. And then focusing specifically on St. Louis housing history, he says, St. Louis appointed its first plan commission in 1911, and 5 years later hired Harlan Bartholomew as its full-time planning engineer. His assignment was to categorize every structure in the city, single-family residential, multifamily residential, commercial, or industrial, and then to propose rules and maps to prevent future multifamily, commercial, or industrial structures from impinging on single-family neighborhoods. According to Bartholomew, an important goal of St. Louis zoning was to prevent movement from, quote, finer residential districts by colored people, end quote. He noted that without a previous zoning law, such neighborhoods have become run down. Quote, where values have depreciated, homes are either vacant or occupied by colored people, end quote. A reminder that the language used in that paragraph is from a particular time and a particular person with a specific set of views. It's not language we're familiar with or would use today, but it is language of the time. So I am quoting, I'm not saying that myself, just to give some context to that. The wild thing about this particular urban history is how utterly boring and banal the evil of racism actually is. In other words, it's mundane. It's normal. In the case of St. Louis, at least, there's nothing overt about this. It's a bunch of zoning laws that, when put into place, would by economics alone keep African American families out of certain neighborhoods. And this is in the 1910s. This is a century ago. What about now? Is it any different? Well, 4 decades after the passage of the Fair Housing Act, residential segregation remains a key feature of Americans' urban landscape. This is Rothstein again, by the way. Although levels of black segregation have moderated since the civil rights era, the declines have been concentrated in metropolitan areas with small black populations. In areas with large African American communities, places such as New York, Chicago, Detroit, Atlanta, Houston, and Washington, D.C., the declines have been minimal or non-existent. As a result, in 2000, so 20 years ago, but still, 21 years ago, but still, a majority of black urban dwellers continued to live under the conditions of hyper-segregation. This idea of hyper-segregation is the sort of thing that we can talk about in relation to a work by somebody named Douglas Massey, who wrote a report called Racial Segregation and the American Foreclosure Crisis. So now not 20 years ago, now 10 years ago. He says that racial segregation has always created a dense concentration of potentially exploitable clients in need of capital, but also what changed in the 1990s was the attractiveness of such borrowers to mortgage lenders. Author Ta-Nehisi Coates refers to this as plunder. Slavery was plunder. Jim Crow was plunder. And now segregation is plunder. As Coates himself makes clear, quote, plunder in the past makes plunder in the present efficient. And this is from a piece called The Case for Reparations, which is the first reading that you're going to have to do for the course. It is a profoundly good essay, but it is also talking about this very idea that plunder in the past makes plunder in the present more efficient. The tools by which segregation takes place now are more sophisticated and subtle and arguably normalized than those of Bull Connor and George Wallace and the quote-unquote civil rights past. In this class, we will work together across disciplines to make our own contributions to these problems, old and new. We're not just experts in our field. We are Christians and ethical citizens who've been given the task of lifting up the lowly. In this class, we'll be putting the critical faculties of our majors, the tools that we've gathered, the resources that we have in our particular area together into understanding how to better love our neighbors. How will we do this? How will we do this interdisciplinary work where we try to understand and better love our neighbor? Well, we will do it in this class through a series of individual and group assignments. And those individual and group assignments, they are right there. You can see them. All nice and shiny right there. Okay. Again, seems like a lot, is not as much as you would think, and in fact makes a lot of sense when taken as a cohesive whole. So the first assignment you'll do is an individual assignment, and that is your Christian thought or ethical thought paper. A common question that I get about this particular assignment is, do I have to write 2 papers? And the answer is no. This assignment is about thinking about your values and how they shape who you are today. Taking what is implicit to you and making it explicit for the reader, in this case, me. Now, this assignment requires you to think about, okay, what is something that I hold to be true? Is there a particular ethical principle that you hold to be true? Like, people should be honest in every case, no matter what the situation may be. Or maybe it's a particular theological position, like because God has created everyone, the image of God rests in everyone, and that means that we have an obligation to treat everyone as a creature created by God. And there are consequences that follow from that particular theological belief. This is all I'm talking about in this case. For this paper, you just have to make that available through and known through writing it down. Why might this help your particular group project or your larger project? Because now you have your values out in the open. And you've begun that work of self-examination. What do I believe? What do I care about? How has what I've experienced and what I think about shaped me in such a way that now I can put that out into the world? That drives me. I am driven by what I value, not just what my attention happens to be on at the time. The next paper that you'll work on is your disciplinary reflection paper. Now, your disciplinary reflection paper is quite literally what it says. You are reflecting on your discipline. What tools and skills do you have available to you as a biology major, as a business administration major, as a counseling major, these sorts of things, right? What drew you to that discipline? What made you stick with it? What makes you excited about working potentially in that field in the future? These are the things that you'll be thinking about with this paper. How might this paper help you with your larger assignment? Well, you now have not just a value perspective, you have a disciplinary perspective. You have tools that help you think in a particular way. And those tools and way of thinking are different from what other people have and what other people do. And that means that now you get to have a unique perspective relative to your group members. You've got something to say because you've got the particular angle that you, with your values and with your disciplinary skills, bring to the table. Which is pretty cool, because now, you're ready to do the group thing. With the group project, there are a number of preliminary steps that then lead into the larger assignment. The first step is to come up with a group project proposal. Group project proposal is simply putting together what you as a group want to examine, how you're going to examine it, and what you hope to achieve through it. So, for example, if you wanted to study the way that uh, certain sports flourish in private travel leagues while other sports are primarily local, you could look at that because there's some economic, racial, ethnic, geographic tensions and complexities to that issue. And you can say, we want to look at this from a variety of angles. We have a kinesthetic one where we are looking at how does constant travel and performance in sports affect the developing bodies of these younger athletes? How does it affect them psychologically if you were a psychology major, right? What is the business environment that makes this and sustains this approach to amateur athletics? If you're, in finance or something like that, right? There is an interdisciplinary project within the framework of thinking about who is our neighbor and how do these various aspects of our identity, both individually and socially, shape the way that we engage with our world. You make a proposal. Your proposal gets approved or some comment on it, and then you start doing a bibliography. What is a bibliography? Simply put, the bibliography is saying, okay, we're going to look at this stuff because we think that this stuff is good and helpful and is going to support the arguments that we have. Or it's going to develop further the questions we're trying to ask. Good? Show your sources. A bibliography is, at the end of the day, showing your work and inviting other people to look at that work and see if they want to participate in that work as well. It's not tedium. It is actually a social and relational document that is demonstrating your accountability to your discipline, to your group members, and to those who are reading your bibliography. And then you get to the actual project components, and there will be a whole separate video dedicated to the project itself because this one's already way too long. We've reached the end. You might feel a little overwhelmed. You might feel bored. You might feel like you don't understand why this class exists. That's okay. All of that's okay. This class exists because we face problems and challenges and opportunities that require interdisciplinary thinking. And we are an institution, Greenville University, that believes that you grow from experience doing that work. So this is an opportunity for you to do just that. You are at the end of your general education, and you are in a class that is asking you to apply what you have learned to something that has real material stakes. I can't think of a better challenge to accept at the end of a career in education than that. So you can do this. I am excited to be in this class with you, and I hope that you have lots of questions, and I hope that you have a lot of excitement to do it as well. And I will talk to you in the next video.